Okay, so I'm going to be second fixing this socket. What I've done is I've got a socket here. It's a BG Nexus. I quite like the slim curve of it. When it's sitting on the wall, it looks quite nice. The front of it's not too bad. It comes with screw covers, which aren't on the back of the thing. They must be somewhere else, but I'll find them. Screw covers, which I like. I mean, I don't like seeing screws. I don't think there's any reason to see that, should I say. I like to use CK croppers to strip my cables with. I find that, you know, for stripping purposes, they're okay. You can grip hold of the core to pull that along, and then when you're stripping back a piece of flex, because of the shape of the jaw, you can grip that around the flex, give it a bit of a twist, and just score the outside insulation, and then break it away. So for me, these tick all the boxes. I've then got a Klein Tools flathead screwdriver. Again, it's looking a bit battered now because I've used it for a few things that you probably shouldn't do. Probably prizing by the looks of it. But again, the head of it is still square, it's still straight. So that, you know, apprentices, make sure that your tools grip the screws properly. Because if they're not, you're not going to be able to get the purchase on it necessary to get it up tight. So you want to make sure that it feels solid in there. What else have I got? I've lost the screws for this socket somewhere along the line, so I've got two 35mm plate screws, 3.5mm plate screws, which I'll talk you through in a second because I need to make sure they're not too long for the box. So when I bring the camera up, I'll show you. And then I've got some 1mm, it might be 2mm CPC sheathing, video sleeving. Personally, I don't like baggy sleeving. I think it should be tight to the cable. It looks right. If you've got baggy sleeving, I just think it just looks wrong. It looks a bit amateurish. So get the right size sleeving. I've got different types. I've got 2mm, 3mm, and I think I've got some 5mm on the van as well for some bigger cables. But that usually covers everything that I need anyway, until you start getting up to stranded cores with sort of 6mm, that comes with 2.5 in most instances. That'll be 10mm, which comes with a 4mm, in which case you need to get to a larger sheathing, sleeving, shall I say. Right, okay, let's bring this up. This is the socket that I'm going to second fix. As you can see, I've cut out the front of this, and I coil my cables up in the back. Keeps it nice and neat for the plasterer. The good thing is about these PC products, socket and switch beads, is that I could have, if it wasn't my house, and this is what I would have done with the apprentice, is I would have had the apprentice running around stripping these off, terminating them, and putting them into Wagos. So I've got a couple of Wagos here. Absolute godsend, these lever ones for temporary connections. So you literally undo that, you put your core in, and then you push these back down again. Now these are not maintenance free, these ones. You can still pull the cable out of that. I'll probably show you that in a second. So that these aren't classed as maintenance free. Okay, so let's pull these out. I like to bring my cables out, straighten them out. I've got the windows open so you can hear all the motorbikes going past. Okay, you can see that I've got some conduit in here, so these actually move up and down. So I can choose whether or not I'm going to push some of that back down again, which I am going to do a little bit, just to make sure I've got some slack behind there. I then grab my cutters. Let me just bring this out a bit more, might make it a bit better. Okay, so then I bring these out, and what I do is I cut this down the centre of here. Now what I don't want to do is I don't want to cut down onto the CPC. Okay, I want to go to the side of the CPC, so just slightly off centre, pull it apart. As you can see, I haven't damaged the CPC. I can then just flick that up with my finger or with the cutters, And what you want to do is you just want to get a bit of a grip on it. You don't want to cut it, you don't want to damage it. And I'm not pulling the CPC, I'm pulling the cables away from the CPC. So I'm pulling this down, okay, and out. So I'm not pulling on this, more on this, more on these cords. I then bring this all the way down to here, all the way down to the bottom, and then I just cut that off, okay? And the reason for that is it looks neater, but also, as well, it saves on space. Taking this out, I've lost 2mm on space there, front and back. And if you've got two of these, obviously doubled up, that's 4mm in my opinion. So that's 4mm I've lost just by stripping this all the way off. Do the same with the other one. It's a bit difficult to get the angle on this. Let's do it like that. So do the same on this one. So again, slightly off centre. Okay, so I haven't damaged the CPC. I then flick that up. And then I just grip it, but I pull this away from my cutters. Alright. Oh, and that's a little thing for the apprentices there. Don't let this scrape round on the wall and damage the wall. So I always pull it back out so it's away from the wall. Because for some reason, you know, like on white walls, it makes a dirty mark, black mark. If in the worst case scenario, it could actually even score through the paint. So again, when I cut down through this, the way I'm doing it is I'm putting my cutters on top of the cables so that I don't actually stand a chance of clipping them by mistake, okay? In fact, I could get that a little bit tighter. Hold these out of the way. Okay, there we go. And again, the good news is with using a bit of conduit is that I can, in fact, I'm just going to nip that bit off as well, just so it looks a bit neater and square. I can also just push that down to there. Now I don't want it to go in too far because I don't want it to be able to push into the conduit. Again, just straighten these up. I'm just going to close this window because we can hear everything that's going past. Right, that's better. Okay. Now, here's where I do things slightly differently because obviously everybody can do this up to a certain point. I separate my CPCs from my cores, okay, from my line conductors. Now these line conductors are going to this is the same sort of lengths as they are on the back, on same sort of positions on the back of this socket, so I can cut these off at the same length. Now a good rule of thumb is to go to the furthest point of the socket and then up to that corner, and that's your worst case scenario, and I cut all those off at the same length. Obviously this circuit is not even connected into the consumer unit yet, it's completely dead, so I know that I haven't got to perform my safe isolation test before I cut through those. They're not even in the consumer unit, this circuit. Okay, now, so I've cut these off the same length because they're all going to the same position. However, you'll notice that what I've got is I've got the neutrals on the outside, okay, and I've got lives in the middle. So when I come to connect this up, these are going to be crossing over. And again, when things cross over, it creates depth, it creates thickness. You end up with a bit of a knot in the back of the socket. So the good news of when you do it with a bit of conduit in the wall is I can actually spin that over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the back of the socket. I'm going to turn it around the way it would face the wall, and I can see that the line conductor is going to be on the right hand side and the neutral conductor is going to be on the left hand side. So I want the lives on the right, so this cable's okay, this one I want to spin. So I'm going to pull that up, pull that bit of slack up, I'm going to twist it over, and then I'm going to push it back down again, okay? Perfect. So now, and let's take those CPCs back up again. Now, I don't know if you can see that. Let's zoom that in. Okay, scroll that up a bit. Yeah, so I've got the lives on the right hand side, neutrals on the left hand side. Okay, and they're not crossing over each other. All right, bring that back out. Now, obviously, because these are going to the same place, I can just strip this off. I wonder if I can get that in enough that I can do that. Okay, here we go, let's try that. Is that too much? There we go, let's try that there. Now the trick to stripping this is not to have too much. You want enough, you don't want too much. So I always sort of go for about 1 centimetre. And then what you're looking for is that when that core goes into this socket, okay, you don't want to, and bend it over, you don't want to see copper sticking out the end. So for instance there, you can just see a little bit of copper. I'm okay with that, being able to see a tiny bit of copper showing. What you don't want is anything more than a kind of millimetre showing. You shouldn't have that. If you can see that, that's wrong. That needs to be further in. Okay? So the same with the other one. So I know that this length is okay. Again, I've second fixed these sockets so many times. I know that I'm going to be alright with the lengths that I've got. Okay, I'll get that in. Now what I do is I push that in as far as I can, and then with this pushing against my hand, I hold on to the socket, keeping the pressure into the socket as I do it, so that with my other hand, I can, probably can't see, that's too far in. With my other hand, I can do the purchase on these terminals, okay? Right, now, before I go anywhere else, we do the all-important tug test. I can't get that off. I bend it over. I can literally just see a tiny bit of copper there. I don't know if you can see that. Just the tiniest amount. I'm okay with that. Okay, I'd rather see a little bit of copper than not enough copper. Any more than that, though, I'd be re-terminating it. Okay. Because when it's like this, you actually can't even see it. It's only because I've pulled it down. So again, I can do the same with the neutral. And what I'll do is once this is done, I'll bring it in for a close-up of the back of the socket, and then I can show you what to look for. What you don't want is you don't want the terminating screw to be down on. Let's get that one there. So again, this time I'm holding it with my fingers and I'm just sort of pulling it into the socket. I guess it's hard to talk about things that you usually do just without even thinking about it. Okay, now when I'm tightening these up, what I do is I get it tight, you know, sort of grip tight, and then I just give it a little tweak, just a little quarter of a turn, just to make sure that I'm bitten down into the thing. The all-important tug test, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this in and just show you, hopefully, what we're looking for. So, I've done this deliberately, by the way, guys. See if we can see that. Now, I can't see any copper there before the screw, all right? Can I zoom that in? Not going to like it, is it? Come on. No, not like it. Okay. I can't see any copper before that screw. So I don't know whether or not I've caught the insulation or whether I'm just in front of it and I can't see the copper. For me, that's questionable. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to undo that and just check that that isn't quite on there. Okay, now look. There we go. I don't know if you can see that. I was actually down on the sheath. Okay, if you cannot see copper, chances are you are on top of the basic insulation. So I'm going to bring that back out. In fact, I'm just going to strip that back that far. Maybe the same on the other one as well. Now when I'm using these cutters to go in, I'm not cutting into the copper core. I'm literally just scoring the insulation and then flicking it off. Okay, let's see if we can bring that back in again. Now I don't know if you can see that. Now I can see copper. Okay, so I know that my termination is okay. I give it the quarter test, tug tightness test. I'm happy with that. Now let's talk about the CPCs. Okay. You'll notice, hopefully, let's bring this out a bit. You'll notice, hopefully, that I've made one longer than the other. And there's a reason that I do this. I like to earth the back box. Not everyone does. It does say in the regulations that as long as you've got one fixed terminal, one fixed fixing lug, okay? So obviously we've got one that's adjustable. As long as you've got one fixed lug, you do not have to earth the back box because it's earthed through the screw, through the faceplate. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, but obviously in this screw hole, let's see if we can get that in. So in that screw hole you can see copper. When that screw goes in, oh, there's not in there, then that earths the box through the plate screw. Now my argument is, and a lot of people disagree with me, my argument is that once you take that faceplate off, this back box is no longer earthed. And a lot of people will say, well, nobody should be getting access to that socket unless they know what they're doing. That's great in an ideal world. We all know that we don't exist in an ideal world, okay? We know that people go to Screwfix, they go to B&Q, they buy faceplates, they change these sockets. They don't tighten the screws up tight enough on the terminals. So when they pull this forward, there's a chance that that could come out and just be hanging around in the back. Or worse still as well, which I've seen, is they don't put a grommet through the metal knockout. And then where this socket's been pushed back or forced back because they've crossed all the cores over and there's not enough depth on the socket, that then cuts into the cores. And then what happens is, as you push it back, it cuts in, and then when you move it around again, you've got bare conductors, bare live conductors hanging around in the back, which could then catch back onto the metal knockout. All right. So from my point of view and my own personal opinion, this needs to be earthed, regardless of what the regulations say. And don't forget that BS 7671 is a non-statutory document for starters, but also it's the minimum safe standard, okay? You can work from the regs, not to the regs. And what that means is you can go above and beyond rather than just working to the bare minimum. Right, so what I like to do is I like to have one that's slightly longer than the other. The terminal screw is on the top right here. Usually I like it at the bottom, but I couldn't because there was a joist right below this socket, so I had to bring the cables up on one corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure a piece of CPC long enough to get to that with a bit of slack. Okay, so about that long. I'm then going to put that on the longest CPC. Okay, I'm not going to cut this CPC because what's the point of cutting it and then rejoining it? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to bend that over. And this is another reason why I like these cutters. They've got this flat sort of stopper here, which I then use to squeeze this together. Okay, so you don't have to have separate pliers in order to achieve this. Okay, don't know if you guys can see that, but that's now tight. I'll undo my screw. I can bend that up and in. And same rule applies. I'll get it just gripping, little quarter turn, just to make sure that I've bitten into the copper. Now you don't want to, it's a delicate balance between gripping into the copper too much or not enough. Okay, so now I've got my 2 CPCs. And what I then do, it's always a good habit to have the CPCs longer than the line conductors, so that if someone brings a socket forward, even if the line conductors drop out, the CPC is still connected. You could argue that it's probably better to have the CPC shorter so that you can't pull on the line conductors. That's an argument for people cleverer than me. But there you go. So I'm going to bring these out to the same level, centre of the socket, and I'm going to trim those off. I'm then going to sleeve these up separately. Anybody that twists their cables together, you're just asking for trouble because it weakens the cable. It's also an absolute nightmare when you come along to test. And if you've got a fault on a ring and you need to split the ring to find the fault quickly, then you have to undo the twisted cable, which then weakens it even further and can snap. And it's just an absolute nose for everybody. And then, you know, typically because they've twisted them together, they then put one piece of sleeving over the top. So then when you come along and separate it, you've got to find another piece of sleeving and all sorts of stuff. It's just not worth the hassle. Now, if this was a high integrity circuit, you know, with laptops or stuff, I would have to put these cores into separate earthing terminals. This isn't a high integrity circuit. I'm not going to bother. I don't see the need for it. I could lie to you for the purposes of the video, but I'm not going to. If you've got any comments to add, obviously hit me up in the chat. Always up for a debate. And all that's going to be connected to this is a couple of radios, maybe a light, and the odd occasional Hoover. Maybe even maybe a laptop, but I wouldn't say it was a high integrity circuit. Now again, I'm pulling, I don't know if you can see this, I'll bring this in again. I'm pulling on the sheathing, to check that the termination is tight, but also I'm checking that I can see copper. I don't know if you can see that in there. I can pull that sleeving back enough that I can see copper, so I know that I'm not bitten down on the sleeving, and I am in fact on the copper core. So again, tug test, I'm happy with that. That is not coming out. Now, a couple of little tips for the apprentices. So again, I like to have all my cables so they're not crossing over. They're nice and neat. Things to think about. I'm going to be using a 35mm screw here. Is this too big? Well, the thing to check is that, can I get that into the box without hitting the back? Yes, I can. If I screw that in too far, because it is longer than it needs to be, is it going to catch the conductors or the CPC and punch through that cable and that effectively split it or earth it out? There's nothing worse than having the apprentice go around, second fix all the sockets. They've caught the neutral on every single socket and the RCD's tripping, because then you have to go around every socket, take it all back off again to find out where the fault is. You don't want to be that apprentice, okay? So what I'm going to do here, because I'm on the furthest hole this side, I'm going to bend the cables this way. This one's going to come across that way. I'm going to put a little bend in it. Okay, so that as I don't know if you can see, let me see if I can get this round here. The only downside to using a camcorder is you can't get that angle that you can on a that tight angle you can on an iPhone. So as you can see, I've put this little bend in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this bend at about the depth of the socket, okay, and then that will sit on here. As you can see, it will go back. That then, because I've put that bend there, will enable this to push in. Okay, what you don't want to do is have the screws, the cables coming out 90 degrees and then crushing them back to get it to fit in. I've preset this so that it's like a bit like a coiled spring, and then that will just push in nice and easy. Nothing's going to get damaged. You can see hopefully from here, if I bring this round, that as I push this back, that line conductor isn't going to get caught. I'm pulling that over, by the way, but it isn't going to get caught behind that live terminal. It's not going to get caught behind that plate screw. It is in fact over here, miles away from it. Okay, so I know with all certainty that when I screw this back, that you can see that in there, but I am nowhere near the lugs, fixing lugs. Okay, I'm going to screw this back. I've just realised I forgot my level. Now, apprentices, when you screw these back, if it doesn't feel right, you're cross-threading the screw, okay? In which instance, you need to stop, don't force it, because all you're going to do is you're going to strip the thread on the fixing lug, you're going to strip the thread on the screw. Worst case scenario, the screw will snap in the lug, and then you're in all sorts of trouble, okay? As soon as you feel that it's cross-threaded, stop, take the screw out, check the end of the screw and recut the thread if necessary. Get a 3.5mm rethreading tool, which I should also have brought over for the purpose of this video. I'll pause this video and then bring it over and edit that in a second. And then rethread it, start again, okay? Don't try and force it. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right, okay? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to screw these back roughly into position. And as you notice, I'm holding it with this hand, twisting and then rolling between my fingers just to get some speed on it. What you don't want this faceplate moving around wildly, because the corners can dig into the plaster and the paintwork, and then you've damaged the wall, and someone's got to come around and touch that up. So I'm just going to make sure that sits in there properly, which it does. It was slightly up too high because the cables were pushing it, and it got caught on a bit of plastic at the back of the socket. So I've just made sure that it's down far enough. I'm just going to take that in roughly, and then I'll come back and level this up afterwards. Okay. Any questions, guys? Hit me up in the chat. Obviously, before I power this socket up, I'm going to come along with my socket tester and I'm going to check that these work. Before it goes into service, obviously I need to do that electrical installation certificate. Okay. If I was going away from this job, I would not leave that live for somebody else to use without it being checked first. Okay. Take care, guys. Bye.